Welcome to Reach Church. I'm Marshall Fant, the Director of Church Consulting and Strategic Planning for Gospel Fellowship Association Missions. My purpose is to encourage pastors and church leaders as you refocus, renew, and revitalize your churches. We've established this podcast to offer practical tips and suggestions as you equip disciples to make disciples. Marshall Fant, welcome back out to GFA's podcast Rechurch. I want to thank GFA Mission so much for sponsoring the podcast. We do this through their sponsorship and their help, and therefore we don't have advertisers that contribute to this, so we're free to say and interview who we want. And I've got one of our interim pastors who we've had on before, Pastor David Shoaf. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for all you are and do, Marsh.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And then again, the Shoafs, Dave and Trina, one of our interim couples, and he pastored how many years there in Illinois, brother?
44 in Illinois. Then I started interim work.
That's when you started the real work, right? So again, in Bolingbrook, Illinois, that's where he lives and serves in that area, and has served in several churches in interim. In fact, I interviewed Pastor Shoaf back in March of last year talking about 5 serious mistakes pulpit committees make. So keeping with that same theme, I want to talk about a different topic, but 5 common mistakes in church documents. So
yes.
Thank you for addressing this topic, because wouldn't it be easy if Timothy or Titus told us exactly how to do documents? Wouldn't that be a blessing?
Right. I agree.
All right. So to kind of launch into it, we could spend hours on this. So we're trying just to capture 5 of common mistakes that you have run into, I have run into, other interims run into. So the theme I want to concentrate here is, as we see so many different churches, we want the church documents to give clarity for a church so it doesn't create confusion at the time it must be carried out or must be enforced. That makes sense, Dave?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And this is probably number one thing you run into when you go to another church.
Yeah, or any church in transition, but a lot of churches so I guess our challenge is twofold. Number one, to pastors.
Yes.
While you're there and you've got the confidence of the congregation, go ahead and fortify your documents.
Yes.
And then secondly, to our church deacons and elders or church leaders that are without a pastor, these are maybe some things you can understand how this could cause confusion within the church during a transition.
Right. And I understand this is hard work. I've done it enough times. You have too. This is a tough job to do. Yeah,
it's tedious. Nobody likes to deal with this until there's a crisis,
right.
a constitutional issue, and then you got to say, oh, no, why didn't we deal with this sooner? Okay.
Right.
All right, so let's launch into it. The first 3 we're going to cover, Pastor Shoaf, have to do with constitutions, okay? So I'm just going to address it. I'll let you comment, then I'll come back and comment, and then we'll try to come up with a workable solution. So this is going to kind of be rapid fire, okay? All right.
Yes.
Common mistake number 1, some churches do not practice what the Constitution states they should practice. Okay, so the question I know you have had to ask and I've had to ask as an interim, okay, so where do you not practice what your Constitution states you should practice, right?
Yes, and some of it is because it's legally outdated.
Yeah, you want to give
some of it is when you don't practice what you wrote down. I think it's illegal, as well as it's not ethical.
All right, so so this could be a big deal or a very small deal, right?
Correct.
All right, a small deal would be one that ran to, let's say the church constitution says, okay, to receive a member someone as a member, you need to follow this procedure. Okay, it is very cumbersome. It was much outdated. And so they just changed what they did. All right. Now, both could be right.
Yes.
Right. So, but you need to practice what the Constitution states. That's a minor one.
Or change the Constitution.
Exactly. So what would What would be some other warnings or explanations of this problem that you would like to say?
Well, one is joining the church. For example, a lady joining the church, so she has to go into a room with 6 deacons. I don't think that's the best way of doing it. I think there's a far better way. Sometimes you have archaic grammar or archaic words that have no meaning today. And I think when we look at these constitutions, many of them are not even dated, so we don't know how old they are.
Right.
So when a constitution is changed, there should be a date somewhere put on it, just so everybody knows when and how old it is. So.
All right. So can we go back to one other issue? There's also, do you know where your Constitution is?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
Because
somebody has it somewhere.
Yeah. So in more than one church, we have gone in and they don't even know where the Constitution is. So, but once you do find it and once you do have it, you do need to practice what it takes out. Now, Pastor Shoaf, I think in our discussion, you made a comment about taking out clutter or outdated material. What would be an example of that?
I have found it in, I think, 3 out of the last 4 churches. They had a Christian school at one time, and so there was a lot of data clutter, if that's the right word, about the Christian school that they don't have anymore.
So it doesn't apply.
Correct.
And okay, so again, so that's an area can create confusion, and so it needs to be updated. So so let's go back. So in doing this, all right. So there's also usually all right. So let's go back up a minute. I should have started with this. So really, the big 3 documents most people say: Constitution, bylaws, statement of faith, and church covenant.
Correct.
And often the church covenant's a part of the Constitution. It can be separately. Okay.
I think I've seen most of them separate.
Separate. Okay. So, but that also needs to be current, correct?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So
I saw an article, I don't know who it was, CLA or somebody, said that if a person can say they agree to it, they should sign it. And I kind of like that.
Yeah, that is a current debate. Okay, if you have a covenant, should you sign it or not sign it? And some say, if you can't sign it, can I sign it for you? And then you initial or, So what I'm saying is, but this is an agreed upon document, just like a constitution. So in a constitution is agreed upon document by a church of the way we will conduct our ministry.
Yes,
and therefore, whether it's a number of business meetings. Like I know one constitution said you're supposed to have a business meeting every quarter, and they had one a year. Okay, so again, the issue is you need to practice what the Constitution states, or what was your solution?
Change the Constitution.
Change the Constitution to match what you practice. Yes. All right, so that's common practice. Any other things on that common mistake?
No, I'm concerned that because it's hard work, you said tedious, people have put it on the back burner.
Sure.
And and maybe some people don't know, maybe some people don't care. So whatever the issue is, this is the number one thing I've been seeing is an outdated, dysfunctional Constitution.
And the number one problem is they don't practice what's in the Constitution, right?
Yeah.
That's number
correct.
1. All right, number 2. Okay, which also creates confusion. The Constitution states that a deacon or elder must rotate off from serving after a certain number of years.
Yes.
Okay, now, we both understand.
That's good and bad.
Yeah. All right, so the good part would be, and I'll let you comment on the bad, okay? The good part would be in a healthy church where leaders are being developed.
Yes.
Okay, and young men and older men are being matured to become leaders, whatever their polity is. The positive is it gives a way for these men to have a place to fit into, either to serve as a deacon or an elder, whatever their constitution is. All right, so that's the positive. Okay, but Pastor Shoaf, what's the big concern here?
Well, it could be a good old boys club.
Okay.
And I don't think that's healthy. And I believe the second one is sometimes when a church declines, there's not enough qualified people to be one. And then you don't have leadership because they can't serve, or you pick the wrong people or unqualified people to be a leader. Right. And you might even call them another name, but there's a double problem there.
All right. So with that, what would be all right. So let's just take a hypothetical, but it's really real. Okay. Cause we've both dealt with it in some way. Yes. A church is without a senior pastor.
Yes.
Okay. There are no men qualified to be a deacon. Right. And so what would you recommend as a stopgap measure if a church finds themselves, Pastor Shoaf, in that situation? What would be a possible solution?
Right. And I also say sometimes men don't want to be deacons.
Especially without a senior pastor.
Yes, right. Yeah. Well, I've done this twice, and that is we have men's meetings. Okay. And we have them pretty regularly, and we just deal with all kinds of either financial things, building things, interim pastor things, all kinds of things, and everybody is informed, and we just keep them up to date on what's happening.
So you treat them kind of like an advisory council, something,
absolutely,
whatever title
very strongly
you
so. Yes, very much so. They know it right off.
So you still have congregational involvement.
Yes.
Okay, but the clause where we started this, a lot of constitutions say a deacon must rotate off after serving 2 terms, and right. So I think it could be we could maybe remove that clause. What would be how would you address that, or would you?
Well, I pastored a couple churches without deacons, so the men's meetings did take that place until there were men qualified and willing to be deacons.
All right, so that's the next point. So if you find yourself in this, then you need to, the interim pastor or the incoming pastor must immediately be discipling men to be able to fill this office.
Absolutely.
Okay. And also, just a side note, these advisory meetings where you would have men, advisory council, men's meetings, whatever you would say it. So, Pastor Shoaf, when you were doing these, how often, just randomly, about how often would you do those meetings with these men? Quarterly or?
Well, no, more quarterly at the least.
Okay.
One of them I was meeting probably every 6 weeks.
Okay.
And the other one was probably every 2 months.
Okay.
So, yeah, I really count on either deacons or such things as men's meetings, because I want to hear what they have to say without any pressure. All right, tell me what you think about this, and we kind of go around the room and deal with a very difficult subject and let everybody talk.
All right, let me put this out there kind of as a clarification point. Most all the churches that we serve as interims are congregational rule.
Correct.
Okay, so I think that's an important polity thing for those who may not know us. So we're dealing with churches that are congregational rule versus elder rule. So this is the reason we believe it's so important to have men of the church involved in this. So I just want to give that big picture of why we're discussing it the way we're discussing it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes,
All right.
I don't know if I'd want to go to another kind of a church. I'd have a problem with it.
Yeah, and that's because of our view of polity, and I would agree with that. I'm sure there's some wonderful churches that operate on a different polity, but in our circles, this is where we best minister. Okay, so and by the way, we went out in the first church replant, or the only replant we did exactly what you said. We did not have deacons. So we had like a men's advisory council, and then we would have regular church meetings for the congregation to get input. So I think what you said, we actually practice. So I agree with that. All right.
Let me say one more thing. When we were working through a constitution at one church, it was so important because we had a pastor in mind but the church was not ready constitutionally to bring him on. So we had meetings twice a week.
Wow.
For probably 6 weeks to get the Constitution in order.
All right. Can you give maybe just one example of what you mean by getting it in order? Can you just maybe one detail to put a kind of to be able to hang a hat? I mean, was it the way to call the pastor? Was it the way it was the way to call him?
Yeah. It involved getting the next pastor.
Okay.
So, yeah, we worked hard on that.
Okay. All right. Common mistake number 3. Which leads into what you just said, is the Constitution usually does not make provision for who is to lead the church if the church is without a senior pastor.
Right. It assumes it.
It assumes it. All right. So, again, the leadership normally would be assumed by the chairman of the deacons.
Correct.
But if they don't have a chairman of the deacons, again, all right, so I think the problem is this. When there's no specified leadership by the Constitution, you have a vacuum in leadership. And normally that vacuum is going to be filled by somebody. All right?
Yes.
So walk us through what you believe if a church doesn't have this wording in their Constitution, and many do not. What would be some possible wording or possible or let's go this way. What would be your ideal solution if a church does have deacons and it's a functioning deacon board and they don't have a senior pastor? What would Pastor Shoaf's recommendation be of who should lead the church during this time? One more caveat. All right. So most churches we serve are 100 to 125 or less with one senior pastor. So we're not talking about a staff of pastors. So
right. If they have deacons and it's a functioning board, then I would say help that chairman to do things publicly where he is not only has the position, but he has the persona of being a leader.
Okay, now let's back up. So do you recommend a constitution to state that he should be the leader of the church if there is no senior pastor?
That would only be one little sentence to put in there. I would.
Yeah. Okay. So I think it gives clarification to where a man, because I think a lot of men, Pastor Shoaf, are fearful of stepping up to that if the Constitution does not give them that authority.
Right.
And it is a fearful thing. These are deacons. They're not called to be shepherds, under shepherds, elders, overseers. So obviously the church has elected them and approved them as deacons, but still it is a fearful thing for a man to try to assume power in a church if the Constitution does not give him that. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yes, and they're almost afraid of the responsibility of picking someone to fill the pulpit until they get an interim pastor.
All right, so
there's a lot of concern there.
All right, but if we put the statement in there that the chairman of the deacons would have the authority, would have the authority to run the church, that also would give him the authority to call pulpit supply, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
I agree.
Now, let's talk about that for a minute. For churches in transition who may not be used to calling pulpit supply, okay, so let's just take a little bit of a rabbit trail. All right, it would be the right thing to do that if you call a man to come in to fill the pulpit, that you do pay his mileage, his expenses, his meals, as well as some type of honorarium.
Correct. So some of these constitutions or practices, if it's not written down, is 50 years old. And so a $1973 needs $7 to replace it.
Yeah.
So if you gave a guy $50 back in 1973, you need to give him $350 now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
and that could be that could just be a policy versus Constitution.
Correct.
But I think a servant's worth of his hire, and I think the church needs to understand that when they call in somebody to fill, whether it's an interim or this pulpit supply, they need to make sure they are taking care of the man coming in to do that. All right.
Right.
All right. So that was a little side note there. All right. Okay.
Now, what if they don't have deacons?
Well, what's your recommendation?
That you pick somebody who is qualified and let him give the announcements or pray or give an update on what's happening to the pulpit committee on a regular basis, just to give him that exposure to the church family.
All right, and if they don't have deacons, again, part of what we do, we'd advise them to consider bringing in an interim.
Yes.
To fill that, to give the leadership, where an interim there can provide temporary the pastoral leadership during the interim until they call somebody. And again, that's the world you and I live in, so we're big advocates of that. And we'll be happy if you got any questions on that. You can contact me at gfamissions.org, or I'll put Pastor Shoaf's email address in the show notes, and you can contact him. All right, common mistake number 4. Membership rolls are not kept up to date. All right, so let me go back.
They don't even know where they are.
Okay, so let's go back. So all right, so we talked about Constitution, bylaws, statement of faith, church covenant, but there are also other records.
Yes.
And these would be business meeting records, financial records, membership rolls, having a policy for child protection, which is very important. Yes. General church policies such as building use, which is also important. So what I'm saying is, now as we venture out of the Constitution, there are other documents that you really need to keep up within your church.
Yes.
Okay. So, all right. So let's go back. Membership rolls are not kept up to date. So why does this create a problem, especially for churches without a pastor, when they're getting ready to call a pastor?
Because they don't know what a quorum is.
All right.
They don't know who can vote, can't vote, and who's going to check on that, and how accurate is that. So you need a clerk or secretary or somebody to keep up with who's coming to church, and they need to put it somewhere and date it.
Yeah. All right. So let's go back to the very beginning. So technically, your Constitution is going to require you to have business meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And most constitutions are going to tell you have to have a quorum. All right. It's usually a certain percent of the membership.
Yeah.
So if you have 100 people on your membership rolls and you don't have but 25 in the church, and you haven't cleaned them up, there's no way you ever can conduct business.
That's
because
right.
you can't have a quorum to have a business meeting. So, I mean, that's just the basics. And then you've got who can really vote, right, for an incoming pastor. All right, so Pastor Shoaf, take a few minutes. Let's just draw a hypothetical, because this is, you and I both come into it. A church has not cleaned up their membership roll in a long time. How what would be some steps that you would recommend to our churches of how to accomplish that?
If I was going into a church as an interim, that would give me a wonderful visitation list.
Okay.
So I would want to visit the ones who are not coming. So I think that they're probably some of the best prospects to get back into the church if you listen to why they're not attending. So they could be just lazy, or they could have a problem with the church, and I would like to hear about it.
Yeah, so there may be unreconciled relationships in the church.
Yes.
That this could be used as a motivation to get that right.
Yes.
Or it could be a person may just felt neglected. So, all right, so I think a key thing, this could be a way to reach out to those who could come back and be active members.
Correct.
Okay. All right, so let's say we do all that, and we still have a list of several, 10, 15, whatever, that either we can't get in touch with, they're not interested, they haven't joined another church, okay?
Or they moved.
Or they moved. And so what would be a simple, practical way to clean up those roles in a business meeting?
Well, after some effort to either see them personally, then write them a letter, and then bring it to the church to drop them, or at least make them inactive members that cannot vote.
Okay, so As the church, again, congregational rule is walking through this, it could be somebody in the church it doesn't always have to be a deacon. Somebody else in the church can reach out to them. So this really can be a time of unification in the church. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be because so many times we think of cleaning up membership rolls as divisive, right?
Yeah, or mean.
Or harsh. But this actually can be a way to bring the church together through prayer and participation.
Yes.
Okay. Any other comments on that?
No, I agree with that 100%. You love the people that used to come there, even if they had a problem.
Yeah. But there will be a time where the church will have to gather and have a list.
Yes.
And say, okay, somebody makes a motion that the people on this list, and you read them, mm-hmm. are no longer active and therefore no longer members of whatever church. And then you second that, and then it's recorded, and it can be but that meeting needs to be prepared and prayed up to. But this can be done in one business meeting, right?
With proper forewarning. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, but also you need to do this before you try to call a pastor.
Oh, yes.
Because then you could have people coming in and voting who don't have any idea what's going on. So all this is part of the preparation. Mm-hmm. But as I said in the beginning, if the current pastor can do this now, so he doesn't put his church in confusion later.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Any other comments on membership roles?
I think that's just the way a pastor should be loving his church or shepherding.
Yeah. And I think a lot of constitutions do require that if someone has not attended in 6 months or a year, they become an inactive member. And a lot of people just park them on this inactive membership list and never deal with it.
Correct.
Or either don't put them on the inactive list. But this is something that needs to be done on a regular basis within the church, correct?
Oh, yes. Yes, very much so.
Okay. All right. Common mistake number 5. All right. The church's statement of faith contains a clause something like, this statement can never be changed. All right. Now, we understand at some time there was proper motivation for such a statement. They never wanted their doctrine to change. So we understand, right, that at a time in church history within the last 50 years, that would be a very orthodox statement to make, especially with churches coming out of and being established because churches had wandered from their doctrine.
Correct.
All right, but now we face a different culture where you have to define marriage, you have to define human sexuality, and all this has got to be a statement of faith. So, Pastor Shoaf, if a church, and therefore, so let's back up. So their statement of faith has this, or their constitution says they cannot change their statement of faith. Therefore, they haven't. Therefore, they are in trouble probably both theologically and legally.
I believe you're right.
Okay, so how would you shepherd, if you come into such a church as an interim pastor, how would you shepherd a church to walk through to understand that they must change their statement of faith? And what would be some solutions for that?
Well, I would contact somebody like CLA or ADF or one of these organizations and seek their counsel on it.
Okay, so CLA would be...
Yeah. They probably filed this as the document, and so it probably needs to be refiled.
You're talking about for incorporation or something like that?
Yeah, for not-for-profit.
Okay.
So there might be more stickiness here than I even think there is.
All right. So when you say CLA, that's Christian Law Association.
Correct.
And ADF
or Alliance. Alliance Defending Freedom.
Right. So both of these are great organizations that come along beside churches to help them through that. So again, but also what would be some ramifications of a church from your perspective. We're not lawyers, we're pastors. So
Right.
we're not giving legal advice, we're giving observation as pastors. What
Right.
could be some potential problems a church may face if they don't update their statement of faith?
They'll end up with the wrong people in it.
Okay.
And good people will leave my son was in a church where somebody came out of the closet, and they could not fire them because of their constitution.
Okay.
So it really gets sticky if it's not all addressed. It needs to be out there.
Okay.
And I want to add, not only exempt activities need to be on there, but prohibition against sharing of corporate earnings, distribution of assets, non-discriminatory policy, statement of faith is the basis of the Constitution. There's just a lot of stuff that a good attorney will put here that will protect the church.
All right, and let's go back, because what you just said might overwhelm the average layman who doesn't have a pastor. All right, so that's what we're saying. You can go to Alliance Defending Freedom. You can go to Christian Law Association, and they can send you forms as samples. In other words, you are not without help in this area, or you can contact us, and we can put you in touch with an interim who can advise you, just as pastor to pastor, okay, not in a legal perspective. I want to say that again.
Correct.
We're coming
Correct.
from
And every state's different.
It is. All right, so with the statement of faith that says it can't be changed, all right, what you can either, I've seen this, so two solutions would be, okay, in other words, one church said, we're so far behind, we need to replace our entire Constitution and our entire statement of faith.
Yes, that would probably be my choice too.
Okay. And so when you do that, you do need to update that with whoever you filed as a nonprofit.
Correct.
Okay. But again, you can seek advice on that. So because it can be very cumbersome to update a Constitution, and it's going to be cumbersome to replace it. So when you make this change, let's make sure we do it thoroughly. Is that a fair way to put it?
Oh, yes. Right.
All right. Can we also say this kind of in closing, that we would never recommend doing something like this without thorough teaching of why you're doing it?
Yes. Several times I have preached through, I've taken a certain Sunday night or some night and just preached through topically what some of the issues were in the Constitution or statement of faith and why.
Yeah, and let's do this. Let's just take it a step further. But you were doing that as pastor, right, or interim pastor?
Both.
Okay, but but you had the authority as either pastor or interim pastor to do that.
Correct.
All right, so there may be some churches listening. They don't have a pastor. They don't have an interim pastor, and that's what I'm saying. We at GFA Missions are here. We have many interim pastors that can help you walk through this, is where I'm trying to go. You're not without resources, because sometimes we get paralyzed because we just don't know what to do.
That's true.
So what I'm doing is just trying to put out, if this is where you find yourself, please email me or email Pastor Shoaf, and we will put you in touch with somebody maybe in your geographic area, one of our interims that can give you some sound advice. Is that fair? I just volunteered you for some work.
Yeah, and remembering we're not attorneys.
Exactly. Okay. But we always will reference you to have this checked by a good legal attorney. Correct. Of course, that's the wrong wording. An attorney. A legal authority. Let me put it like that.
Well, a church attorney, which is different.
It is. Nonprofit attorneys know a whole lot more than the others. Okay. So let's wrap this up. We talked about 5 common mistakes in church documents. Anything you want to add to this? Because we could go on for another 2 or 3 hours.
I know. This is number one right here to me in documents is the Constitution and the relationship that it has with the statement of faith. They should be tightly connected where you can't break them apart.
Yeah, I agree.
Even in a court of law, the statement of faith holds is the basis of it.
Yeah, and the statement of faith that you need to have from a couple of updates that we have helped with It should have the scriptural references.
Yes.
Of why you believe. Some churches have a creed instead of a statement of faith. Okay, I understand that. But still, in order to make it strong, you need to put the scripture references right along with that statement of the phrases in the statement of faith or in the creed, whichever you're using.
I agree. And I even wrote them out in one church.
Interesting.
It became a 70-page document, but still.
Rather too much than too little. Yeah. Okay. All right, Pastor Shoaf, any closing comments?
No, I appreciate you doing this, and you are right on. This is a big deal.
Okay. Well, again, Pastor David Shoaf, his wife Trina, have ministered to many, many churches, and we have the Shoafs as well as other couples available. We're here to help you. So, again, churches, if you have not examined your documents, it's not the most exciting thing to do until you have to have them. And then you realize how much confusion can be caused by not having documents up to date. Okay, Pastor Shoaf, thanks for your time.
Oh, man, thank you.
You're listening to ReChurch, a podcast of Gospel Fellowship Association Missions. If you would like more information about our ministry or how we may assist you and your church, visit us at gfamissions.org/consulting.